Enterprises around the world are exploring how drone technology can provide efficiencies to their industries. We may have some answers. Welcome to the FLIR Delta podcast, where we bring in leaders within the drone community and discuss their insights, perspectives, and unique journeys through the unmanned industry. I'm your host, Randall Warnes. In this episode, I sit down with Brandon Declet, CEO of Measure. Brandon is behind the concept of drones as a service and leads one of the largest enterprise service providers in the industry. In this episode, we discuss entrepreneurship, the industry in the nation's capital, and the importance of people.
So Brandon, we're going to talk a bunch about drones, but before we do that, who is Brandon outside of the drone world?
That's a good question, Randall. I feel like I work 24/7. So since I founded Measure, it's kind of my baby. And so I eat, drink, and sleep Measure. But when I'm not at my computer or not on the phone, I'm with my wife and my 3 kids.
Awesome.
So next to work is family.
Yeah.
And so I spend any off time I have with them.
Good. Well, it sounds like you're a good man. And then when it comes to your baby that you've been building, was Measure your first step into the drone industry, or did you have exposure before?
Measure was not my first step in the drone industry. Prior to Measure, I was kind of working on the policy side of the industry, so very much looking at regulations, how those regulations were changing. I did some work in government on the defense side of the business, national security work with drones, and I kind of had this eureka moment when I said, is there something that we could do here to commercialize this technology and make it something that businesses could actually use?
Okay, so when you founded Measure, it was 2015?
2014. June. This is year 5 for me. So I was actually funny. I was actually commenting to someone the other day, or yesterday, that probably 5 years ago, all of these people in this room were doing something else besides drones.
Right.
And I kind of feel like I've been around long enough to see like the ebbs and flows of this industry and see new people come into it, and it's just been really exciting.
Yeah, so the initial intention of Measure, because the drone industry has changed so much, that the initial intention of Measure was what?
The initial intention of Measure, actually the name before Measure was something called Drone Capital Partners. And it was this idea of leasing drones to big companies. And this was like, military grade drones. This is before DJI kind of got into the commercial space. This was when they were still kind of doing the toy thing. And I quickly realized that idea was somewhat flawed in that, you can lease a Boeing 737 to an airline. They know exactly what to do with it. And I wondered to myself whether or not a company or any company understood what to do with, let's say, a Boeing Scan Eagle. If you leased it to them and said, okay, you don't have to pay $3.1 million, you can lease it on a monthly basis. Okay, great. But now what? Like, what am I doing with all the data? What am I doing with the drone? Who's maintaining it? And I said to myself, well, there has to be another way to do this. And it kind of turned to this idea of drone as a service where you could offer something that's turnkey. And then, as we've progressed here over the past 5 years, we've begun to notice that a lot of customers are kind of hybrids. In other words, they have their own internal drone programs, they have their own pilots and their own equipment, but they're also relying on third-party vendors like Measure to do some operations. And that's the genesis of Measure Ground Control really was, how do we take all that operational expertise that we've built over 6,000 some odd commercial flights and offer that to customers that want to have their own drone programs. So what are best practices? How do you track and maintain aircraft? How do you ensure that pilots are properly trained? So all of that.
So as a drone as a service company, and I know you maybe have coined that concept, for a drone as a service company, what challenges are different today than they were, say, pre the Part 107?
For Measure?
Yeah, for Measure.
I think the challenges are, as they are for most companies in this industry, is, market adoption. I think we've been talking, like I said, for the past 4 or 5 years that, market adoption is right around the corner. And when I say market adoption, I mean companies that are really putting significant budget to implementing the technology and collecting really good data. And that's been way slower than everyone's expected. Every year they say this is the year, and maybe that's okay. I think people need to understand that it takes a long time for some technologies to get adopted. I mean, we're finally seeing things that have never really happened before in this industry were multi-year contracts. Think about it. I mean, most of the stuff that's been done in the past 4 or 5 years has been, proof of concept one-offs. And now we're actually seeing companies say, okay, no, we get it. We understand the value of the data that's being collected with drones. Now we want to do kind of reoccurring type contracts.
So you mentioned that you founded Measure in June of 2014. Do you know the day? Just curious.
I think it was definitely the middle of the month.
Okay, so June 17th, 2014 was my first day in the drone industry
Okay,
as well.
so it was somewhere around there, yeah.
So it's interesting because I remember that during those early days, the concept of scalability and the concept of mass adoption wasn't there. I was feeding drones into one-off, early adopters.
Yeah, that's right.
And I barely understood the power of this technology. It was amazing. Watching something hover that was, heavy enough that it, in my mind, shouldn't do that was amazing. But I had no clue that we would get to this point where now we sit in these entire conferences and there's entire events just talking about one use case of this technology. But when we talk about mass adoption, when we talk about the drone explosion that's going to, change the way that jobs are handled, we see it in some industries, but not all. And so what are you seeing the industries that you're finding are truly grasping onto this technology?
Yeah, look, the biggest industries that we're seeing at Measure are really in the energy vertical, so and actually renewables. So the inspection of wind turbines, for example. I think you're seeing mass market adoption right now. I think we'll do somewhere in the neighborhood of 2,000 wind turbine inspections this year, and we're probably the number 1 or number 2 company in that space using drones for wind turbine inspections here in North America. You're also seeing it with the inspection of solar panels on solar farms. So rapid market adoption in energy. I think when we get to the point where we can do beyond visual line of sight, that's when you really see transmission and distribution take off, pipeline inspection. Obviously, we see market adoption in media because, Hollywood gets it now. Drones are cool. They get great shots, and they're cheaper than helicopters. So we see a lot going on there. The unfortunate part of media is it's a bit, project-driven. So you don't, once the movie's over, your gig's over. Whereas with the energy space, the wind turbine needs to be inspected, either once a year or every other year. So you see that kind of reoccurring business. And obviously construction. I think AEC, the architecture, engineering, construction space, you're seeing widespread adoption. And a lot of that is also being done, by the companies that are actually putting up those buildings. So it's an interesting space.
Something interesting for me to consider, you as a drone as a service company, you not only handle training, you handle flights yourselves and collecting data yourselves, you deal with payloads and different airframes and different softwares that are outside of your own and then your software included. Yeah. So mentioning the energy space and AEC, thermal obviously has a role in that. And so because I represent a thermal imaging company, where are you seeing thermal adoption in renewables or even in wind turbines where it's not thermal? What are the things you're using that add value other than just basic imagery?
Well, first let me just say, so at Measure we've kind of evolved from drone as a service. We've pivoted towards being kind of an aerial intelligence company that's got expertise in software now and that operational expertise feeding that software development. But when it comes to what we're seeing in thermal, we use thermal all the time, for solar farm inspection. It is probably one of our most lucrative applications right now. We are literally flying almost on a near daily basis using thermal cameras to identify dead panels, and we're finding that we can actually begin to calculate what a potential company is losing in terms of dollars or efficiency from each individual dead panel that we're finding. So that's our biggest thermal use case right now.
Gotcha. So as a CEO and with such a complex business environment, how do you stay organized? And this is not drone related, this is just you as someone running a business.
Yeah, you really have to prioritize. I'm a big believer that no one is really good at multitasking. You really have to put a list of things together and really just check each one of them off. I literally sometimes have a whiteboard that's just things that I need to do, and when they're done, I cross them off. And it's very hard to tackle a list of 3, 4, 5, 6 different things at a time. So that's important. And also, I'd be lying if I didn't say I kind of lived out of my inbox a little bit. But also, I have found that sometimes picking up the phone is a lot faster than waiting for an email response. So staying organized is really just about prioritizing and keeping a list.
Sure. And I think that Measure is interesting because you're in Washington, D.C. Mm-hmm. You started looking at policy early on,
right.
In the early days. And you're in this epicenter of drone technology being manufactured all over the world, mm-hmm. and there's a strong China pool. Mm-hmm. And then there's, the internal politics, not only with the FAA, but just government agencies, Department of Defense, etc. What does Measure see being in D.C. that maybe others don't see that you would feel like sharing?
Well, yeah, I think being in D.C., you really get a sense of where the regulator is going. And when I say the regulator, I mean the FAA. So it is incredibly advantageous to be able to take a taxi or an Uber directly to your regulator's headquarters and take a meeting rather than have to hop on a plane, and schedule something months in advance with them. So I think there's a real advantage there, and we've been able to participate more closely in the rulemaking process. I got to sit on the registration task force, and being in D.C. I think was an advantage to providing our insight into that process and to the rulemaking.
Yeah, so I've actually heard D.C. is one of the hottest cities for tech startups, mm-hmm. and it's it makes sense when you know how much education is pumped into that city. Yeah. There's so many bright people, and I think that at first when I was in the drone industry and I knew Measure was based there, I was like, why? Like, you can't even fly in that 7-mile space. So why would you put a drone company there? But it has made more sense as time has gone on.
Yeah, and you'd be surprised at the quality of GIS analysts that you find who worked in government agencies or other private companies in the DC area who are thrilled to come work for a company that's using drones to collect aerial data.
Yeah. So what industries are you finding are experiencing, I guess, the greatest push or are pushing the hardest for new regulations?
It's interesting. Our customers don't often talk about regulation. They've really relied on us over the past 4.5, 5 years to figure that out for them. And the assumption really has been that we know what we're doing. And I think what we've done in the market and the way that we have served our customers, there's just a level of confidence now that people have when they say, okay, we've hired Measure to go fly for us. They know it's going to be done the right way. Mm-hmm. But look, I think the biggest game changer on the regulatory side will be beyond visual line of sight. And it can't come soon enough. You cannot do things at scale. I mean, look, there's tens of thousands of transmission lines and pipelines. We can't do that right now because the economics don't make sense if you can't do beyond visual line of sight. That has to be something that gets done soon.
Sure. And one concept, that's come out of being at trade shows, mm-hmm. we see consolidation. Mm-hmm. We're starting to see players no longer play the game. It's just we haven't hit scale yet, mm-hmm. and so there's only so much room for people to be in the drone space. And I think that beyond visual line of sight is one of the things inhibiting this huge amount of growth.
Yep.
Do you think that for the drone industry, bigger players coming in and being vocal about how they're using drone technology or how they're exploring drone technology is necessary for us to get beyond visual line of sight to be more reasonable or accessible?
I don't know what it's going to take to get the regulator at the FAA to promulgate a new rule on beyond visual line of sight. Consolidation is going to happen because some companies are simply running out of cash waiting for the market adoption, waiting for this scale. I think some business models have proven themselves to be not very good ones. For example, like trying to compete against DJI in the quadcopter space, probably not a great business model. We're seeing a rapid proliferation now since Part 107 of kind of the pilot marketplace. Now, I think there's about, a dozen companies now, or maybe even more, that offer this, 1099 pilot marketplace. And then you've got, I think I spoke to Colin Snow yesterday. He said there's about 140 different companies now that have a data processing platform of some form or fashion. Everyone from, Airware to Precision Hawk to Drone Deploy. And they can't all be making money. And frankly, I think a lot of them are giving it away for free. So if consolidation does happen, I think it's going to happen in the software space, and I mean software, I mean data processing platforms. And I think it happens on the operations side. There's more Part 107 pilots, but not enough work. And if you're only taking 10% off of each flight, and it's $100 a roof,
yeah,
you got to be doing a lot of flights to make that sustainable. So it's going to be interesting. I think there's still plenty of money sloshing around, but it just is, unless we see real changes to the regulatory environment that crack this open more. And like I said, companies really dedicating budget to this, and not just for marketing purposes. Because I've been around this, you and I have been around this industry long enough that we could rattle off a couple of companies that have simply used drones for commercials,
right,
to say they have a drone program, when in reality they really don't.
Exactly. So in having this baby that you've built, which is Measure, what are the things that matter to you most right now? And BVLOS is one of them that I think matters to me the most, because I think it's necessary.
Right.
But what is something that you're like, I wake up every day and give 24 hours of my life to this business because I want to achieve what?
I wake up every day thinking about my team. I think the people that you work with are ultimately the ones that are going to make you successful. There's no way I could do this on my own. So every day I really think about them, and basically trying to set a good example of what it means to be a good leader. Listening, and being humble. And I think I just want us to be successful so that they can be successful. And I think that's a big part of what I think about all the time.
Yeah, so when I started in the drone industry, I ended up having 53 employees of a business that I co-founded. And, that's something that for you as a CEO, I think that would be one of the most rewarding things. That you could see your company grow, but being able to put, people in a position to learn so much and to build something that's their own, and they can drag along with them through the rest of their career with Measure or outside of Measure, maybe. That must be the most rewarding, but it's a great answer, and I'm sure that's really encouraging for them to hear.
Yeah, look, I want it to be a great place to work. One of our values is have passion and be tenacious and move fast, and try and instill those values into the team. And look, I still have employees that have been there since day one, and I think that's a testament to the culture we have and the importance that we put on each other.
Perfect. Well, so I have this thing where I do 5 fast questions.
Okay.
You just give it to me. You haven't seen these before, so this is going straight off the cuff.
All right.
First question's kind of a joke, but you're the guy, we've known each other for, I think, probably 3.5 years or so, 3 years.
Quite some time.
Okay, so this is perfectly fitting for you. Who throws the best parties in the drone industry?
Oh, geez. I think Precision Hawk has. So Precision Hawk currently has that mantle.
Yeah.
Airware used to have that mantle.
Okay.
Airware used to throw the best parties. Then it was Precision Hawk, but they didn't do one this year. So I wonder who's gonna. We don't do parties.
Yeah.
Because I think we're a little bit more frugal.
Maybe it was no parties. We'll give you this capital investment for Precision Hawk, and then you can't. No more parties.
No more parties. But yes.
Okay, that's a great answer. So during the entire year, what is one event or trade show you look forward to the most, or any drone event?
I would say the AUVSI event is always I think it's the key event to be at. I think it draws the biggest crowds and the most potential customers, and that's where I have a lot of my meetings. So I think that's always a good spot to be.
Sure. Okay. So list the following by importance: airframe, payload, software, training.
Training is number 1. I think your payload is number 2, because that's going to get you the data you need. I think software is 3 and hardware is 4.
And do you think that that's because of the evolution of the industry, or do you think the hardware was never the point, or has it just gotten so good?
I just think it's gotten so good. It's about what you collect. So the sensor on that platform, and I don't care if it's a DJI piece of equipment or something from Parrot or whomever. It's more important about the data you're collecting.
Fair
Always has been, and frankly, I think we finally got it.
Good. So who is someone you draw professional inspiration from?
Who do I draw professional inspiration from? In the drone industry, or just
doesn't matter.
Generally,
You personally.
Gosh,
It could be a chance to give a shout out to a mentor. It could be a chance to one of your employees or your peers or anyone. Just who do you draw inspiration from?
I would say that is a hard question.
You're welcome.
I'm gonna have to noodle on that one.
Well, come back.
We're gonna have to come back to that one.
We'll post that when we send this.
That's a tough one.
We'll say Brandon ended up saying fill in the blank. Think about it. No worries.
I'll be honest. I draw personal inspiration from my wife. I think she works. I work. We have 3 kids. I travel a great deal, and she just makes it all work. And I couldn't do this, what I do at Measure, without her.
See, you came to the right answer. I could have just led you down there. You could say happy anniversary. Look what I said.
Our anniversary is on October 25th, so yes.
Okay. Well, we'll wait a year to post it, and then you can have her listen in. But great answer, and we'll edit out this pause in between. All right, last one. You only get to eat one dessert for the rest of your life. Mm-hmm. What is it?
Hot fudge sundae.
Okay. What's on it?
All right, so it's got to be vanilla ice cream. You got to have the chocolate syrup. You got to have the whipped cream, maybe some sort of nut, and some sprinkles. And that, to me, is the best dessert.
All right.
And I always order it if I see it on the menu.
And is that for life?
That's for life, like since I was a kid.
Perfect.
Yeah.
All right. So next big thing for the drone industry.
Gosh, I think you mentioned it earlier. The consolidation. It has to happen. There's just too many players, I think, doing all the same things.
And do you think that the amount of players causes noise where not everyone's consistent and it's not always good quality? That's one thing I worry about personally.
There's huge differences in quality, and I think it's becoming more and more difficult for customers to understand that. I think there's quite a bit of pricing pressure right now because of the proliferation of Part 107 pilots. But I think we have to be honest with ourselves that, and this is what I said to the folks at the FAA and the White House when they were drawing up the Part 107 rules. Having a license to fly doesn't mean you know how to fly. Taking a multiple choice test is not a driver's test. And I recommended, hey, why don't we get these people out there and demonstrate some proficiency? We train our pilots a great deal. We train them not only on the airframe itself, how to fly, the basics of flying, but how to fly for specific applications. It's just not intuitive that a pilot knows how to fly a wind turbine. And we talk about that all the time. But the consolidation issue has to happen. I think there's not enough business to justify, like I said, 140 different data processing platforms or a dozen drone pilot marketplaces. And there's a lot of service providers like Measure out there as well. I mean, there's hundreds, if not thousands, out there. And the adage that you're going to strike it rich in the drone industry just isn't the case. You actually just need to have a really big pile of cash somewhere and spend it very judiciously as the market slowly adopts.
So that leads into another question, which is if someone is trying to, I guess, sustain themselves in the drone industry, but even those that are, ambitious and want to start a company, they have the novel idea. Mm-hmm. What are some of maybe the things that you've learned from that would shortcut someone to success in the drone industry?
I think the key is that's a tough one. I mean, the focus, I think, the biggest opportunity I think right now is in the analytics side. So, I mean, we process so many images. Almost, our analysts go through them almost one by one. Finding a way to automate that, where a computer can tell me that there's a problem with a particular blade on a wind turbine out of 10,000 images, that is like gold. And if someone can figure that out, and that's not necessarily artificial, it's kind of AI, and people talk about AI a lot, but I have a real use case where if someone had an algorithm or something to do that, I'd buy it.
Well, fair enough. Brandon, thank you so much for sitting
Thank
down
you, Randall.
with me.
My pleasure.
And let's do it again sometime.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Thanks for listening. Make sure to head to FLIR.com/Delta for more episodes and downloads. Also, subscribe or follow to make sure to catch all the FLIR Delta content. If there's a topic you'd like us to cover, someone you'd like us to sit down with, or a way we can make this podcast even better, make sure to send us your thoughts to delta.podcast@FLIR.com. Again, thanks for making FLIR Delta part of your connection with the drone industry.